Okay, so last time we left off was at the end of chapter 2, and basically what had happened was Prince Mishin had entered into the mansion of General Yapanchin and had been greeted and spoken to, kind of interrogated, to be honest, by one of his servants who was questioning his motives for being there. Like, oh, does this guy maybe want some, like, is he here for money? Is he here for the purposes of begging from General Yapanchin for the purpose, on the basis of his distant relationship to the general's wife? And so it has been, the circumstances of the prince's coming here has been very much put into question and very much in tension. Not to the prince, but to the people who are receiving him. At the end of the chapter 2, the Ganya, Gavrila Ardalionovich, Ganya for short, had come into the waiting room in which the prince and the service were discussing the guillotine and the prospect of the certitude of death. And then he was described, but that's something we're going to get to later. Now, on to chapter 3. We begin with the prince kind of being welcomed into the office of and the presence of General Ivan Fyodorovich Yapanchin, the man of the house, and the general, a man of power, a man of modesty and decorum, and a man who, as just articulated, who the prince shares a distant relationship to through marriage. So the prince comes in with Ganya, Gavrila Ardalionovich. The prince and Ganya come into the office with Ganya's purpose being professional. He works for the general, and the prince's purpose being unknown to the general, but to the prince, he's just there for the purpose of acquaintanceship. And so we get into the office, and the general is polite, the general is greeting, and the general is questioning the prince a little bit. He's asking about where he came from, what his motivations are, what his reason for being here in the office of the general are, because he doesn't want to spell it out either. In a similar tone to his servant, he doesn't seem to want to spell it out either, but he has suspicions and he has trepidation due to the fact that he doesn't want to be begged. He's not open to giving this guy a ton of money, and who is this guy in the first place? So he's coming into the situation, or the prince is coming into the situation in his office, and this general is trying to get to the end of that story. The general knows that he's not going to be this guy's benefactor, pretty much, but is kind of sussing out the situation as a whole, because it would be quite impolite to just assume that that is the motivation right away. So he and the prince get to talking, and the conversation basically revolves around the prince and his history. Of course, you're coming here on the basis of being a distant relation? Well, that alone, the prince says, that alone is not really much reason for my being here. And actually, I am a distant relationship. It's kind of he's a distant relationship, but he had come in with a lot of considerations in mind. The prince did. I am not here for your money. I am here in St. Petersburg with barely a few kopecks to my name. Like I have no money or anything. But even if you had invited me, I would reject your invitation to stay with you just on the basis of principle. I'm not. I understand that it would be very uncomfortable for me to come in and assume so much of you, and I don't like to make people uncomfortable like that. I am actually only here to make your acquaintanceship. The general has all these frameworks of assumption that he's operating with, and I get a notion that he sort of has a pretty solid assumption, probably founded by experience in the past. He's 55 years old. He has certain expectations for where this conversation is going, what this guy wants from me. And so the prince kind of comes in, and it's very much around this guy wants something from me in terms of money, a job, a place to stay. And the prince kind of comes in, and over the course of a short conversation, just with his authenticity, really, and honesty and consideration for the manner of the man across from him, he's sort of dismantling these assumptions. He says things like, oh, well, basically what you're saying is that since we're not a particularly close relation, and I might as well just go, right? That's completely okay with me. I'd be happy to go. In fact, the only reason for being here is that I wanted to make your acquaintance. I know you are a distant relationship of mine, and when my train was passing through Berlin, I thought that I was thinking of people that I might try to meet when I first came to Petersburg, and since I have no relationships and I heard many good things about your family and how friendly you guys are, and I thought I might just come in and say hi, try to make your acquaintance. I would refuse room and board. I would refuse any money from you, but I thought perhaps naively that we might be friends. And the general is kind of taken aback by this because everyone's doing things for a reason, right? But this guy doesn't seem to be. So he starts interrogating the prince a little bit. Well, do you have any skills? Do you have anything that might gain you a profession here? The prince kind of says no, but the general asks further and further, and he finds out that the prince is actually quite an expert calligrapher. And he admits along the way that, like, oh, you know what, Prince, I'm surprised to find myself here and saying this, but I quite have taken a liking to you. Like it's something just about him that the general appreciates. I think he feels comfortable because presumably he doesn't want to carry into conversation these like guardrails of boundary, of keeping himself distant from the people he talks to because he needs to protect himself and his family from those who maybe want to take what he has without reciprocity. I think he appreciated when the prince was dismantling those, and when the prince offered to leave, because he did. He came here with nothing, but his hands weren't open, except for a handshake, you know? Like, the guy was just wanting to get to know people. And as his distant relations, as I've said, this was maybe a good place to start. Normally, there are a lot of ways someone could come about expressing the sentiment the prince has without it coming across as genuine and without it being bought by the general and without it comforting him. But due to the prince's frankness, plainness of demeanor, and authenticity, the way he conducts himself with honesty as a value, the general has found himself in a situation where he quite likes this guy who he assumed this interaction would go differently and he would send him on his way. But he quite likes the guy. And so he more or less invites him with continued conversation to stay. And, oh, you're quite a good calligrapher? Well, let me see. Let me see. Here's some fine writing material. You get to writing. And then, like, to show me, because there's a job in that. We could maybe find something for you. And then this whole time in the room, this is a conversation between two people, the general and Prince Mishkin, but Ganya's there as well. It's a room with three people in it: Ganya, Prince Mishkin, and the general. Now the general sets the prince about to task to the task of writing and demonstrating his calligraphy abilities. And then the conversation, upon the noticing of a portrait of Nastasia Filipovna, who we've mentioned, he sets about a conversation with Ganya. Today is Nastasia Filipovna's 25th birthday, and the general, who I guess has a personal relationship with her, has been pressuring her to make a decision regarding her marriage. I guess 25 is pretty old to, I guess 25 is pretty old to not be married in 18 whatever. That's not a huge surprise, but the general seems very personally invested in this and has been promised by Nastasia Filipovna that she might come to the conclusion of who to marry tonight at her birthday party and announce it at her birthday party. Now, this news actually scares Ganya quite a lot, and he has a habit. We'll describe him now. As with two of the characters, Prince Mishkin and Rogozhin, the author first describes Ganya by his physiognomy, like how his face looks, how he kind of composes himself, his visual demeanor. And I get the impression Ganya's is quite porcelain and quite affable, I think. Quite positive and like, oh, nice guy. But the prince can tell that behind that mask, there is something distant. And I think maybe he says something like foreboding. There are implications of like either of complexity or negativity, or perhaps complexity with an element of darkness to it in the prince's initial description, or maybe just the author's, but I think from the prince's perspective, initial description of Ganya. So Ganya's here now, and he's taken aback by this announcement that Nastasia Filipovna is going to decide on who to marry tonight. And he is in the running. He's the sort of tribute put forth by the general, Yapanchin, as a suitor for Nastasia Filipovna, this great, beautiful young woman of 25. He's an employee at the general's at a company of the general. And so the general has, you can tell this conversation between the two of them about the prospect of Nastasia Filipovna's future and Ganya Gavrila Ardalionovich, his role to play in that future. You can tell this conversation has an iterative history. This is not the first time they've discussed this. And earlier that day, Nastasia Filipovna had given her portrait, the one that the general had just discovered, to Ganya as a gift. And now Ganya had assumed, I don't understand why at all, but Ganya had assumed that meant that his reading of that situation was that, oh, surely she meant that I shouldn't bring her a present tonight for her birthday. I don't know why, but maybe he's like looking for a reason. Anyways, he hears the declaration of her intent to announce her marriage, her acceptance of the suitors, of which suitor to marry. He hears of the impending announcement. It's going to happen tonight. It's going to happen at her birthday party. And he turns white and he puts back on his mask. He has fear and he reacts. And you know how my interpretation is that it's one of those situations where something happens to you or something happens to someone that's like above a threshold of demeanor control, you know? When something happens to you that hits you really strongly to the point where you can't integrate it in real time and you can't act upon it in real time. It's too much for your persona, which you carry from between social interactions in which you present to the world deliberately. It's too much for that to hold. And so he seems to have one of those experiences and shut down and put on his face and later on, the general is, and this, I think, among other things, irritates the general progressively over the course of his conversation with Ganya, and the general ends up yelling at him, basically like, "Why are you smiling right now?" But that's a product of and that's more at the end of the conversation, and we're just at the beginning. This is all in the same chapter, by the way, I promise. This is like 10 pages. And so the general and Ganya are talking, and the general is very much pushing Ganya into this marriage and into the notion of he should hope to be so privileged as to marry her. Whether that's right or wrong, he's being pretty insistent, and he's being aggressive, assertive at the very least, in that Ganya should hold this perspective. Now, Ganya turned white as a sheet when he heard that Nastasia Filipovna was going to decide who to marry today on her 25th birthday, and he reminded the general, now it is expected that, now we have us two, you and I, General, have talked about this before, and the matter of her marriage and my marriage to her is predicated not only upon her acceptance of it, but also I was to have a say in the matter as well. And the general does not like this at all. He, instead of, well, he understands to a certain degree, but his thing is that, no, what you should be going into this night with is not that anxiety, but the anxiety that you might receive her acceptance properly and politely and well. And Ganya's like, but I have a say in the matter too. And the general says, sure, and no one's forcing you here, but do you not want this? Thus far, it seems to me that you have articulated to me that this is very much of your interest. This is what you want. Everything you've suggested thus far, maybe the general has set them up even on behalf of Ganya. And so he's really sticking his neck out for Ganya, if that's the case. But Ganya's having cold feet now, and the general is insistent and irritated, like, why are you, what, so now all of a sudden you don't want to marry her now that she's making a decision? If that's the case, say it now so that we don't have to cause any harm in the matter. But to that, and the general raises his voice in saying that, this is when he's like, I think this is when he asks Ganya, like, why are you smiling? Because Ganya's got his mask plastered on. And yeah, at this point and at this level of heightened expression on behalf of the general, which seems uncharacteristic for him, Ganya, who's a young man of the same age as the prince, I believe, or maybe he's older, maybe he's, scratch that. He hangs his head and is very dreary or very like saddened or distant. And he sort of murmurs like, yes, he does really want to marry Nastasia Filipovna now. But his way of expressing that sure seems to be confusing, says the general. So it turns out actually though that his family, Ganya's, is really messed up right now. Presumably how the general and Ganya got in touch in the first place, and Ganya came to be employed by the general in the first place, was that his father, Ganya's father, was a general alongside General Yapanshin in their days of service, and they had gone to war together and were quite close back then. But Ganya's dad kind of lost it, totally lost it, and has been an embarrassment to the house ever since, and has been causing chaos, has these psychotic episodes, and so he's totally out of control, and it's now Ganya's responsibility to sort of, I mean, I guess you would say, be the man of the house His mom cries at night. So they're under a lot of strain. And his mom, too, had come to General Yapanshin to say that she was disgraced by the possibility of marrying Nastasia Filipovna. Now, the General Yapanshin rejects this entirely and basically is saying, like, how could she say such a thing? And she's saying this, she must be saying this to her son at home too, so he's influenced by that as well. That's his family, that's his mom. But now his professional father, as his actual biological father has lost control over his life, surely he turns to the man who gives him a job and was close to his biological father when he had his sanity still. 20 minutes already. Ganya's conflicted and he can't decide what to do, and he's quite lost. On one hand, his mother is ashamed of Nastasia Filipovna for what we don't know, and the General Yapanshin says as much. He has no idea why, especially because he doesn't want to mention it, but she can't recognize her own situation, how their family has fallen out of grace. And so the son of the family is he's in a tough position. Both forces